Hello, explorers. Today's pages will take us through a couple stories based on entirely separate cultures to appreciate both the diversity and parallels among the world's folklores. If you enjoy today, we hope you might also be pleased tomorrow with our other works. A gentle reminder that the stories are written as our fiction and are only based on historical folklore. Feel free to comment what you might already know about tonight's topic, though, and how you learned it. We're very glad to have you here. On to our folklore stories. The winter season in the Kwakwaka'wakwa villages always begins with a hush. The wind moves through the cedar planks of the longhouses, carrying the smell of salt and smoke. The river slows, the salmon are gone, and what remains is the deep stillness that turns every sound into a lesson. For the young men of the village, this is not a season for leisure. It is a time when elders begin to shape their minds and test their restraint. Winter is the quiet training ground, and it decides who will grow into a disciplined man and who will remain a restless boy. At the center of this story is one young man, still thin and long-limbed, standing outside his family longhouse before dawn. He has been told to wait until the sky begins to turn from black to gray, to say nothing and move little. Beside him, the cedar bark strips used for rituals hang from a pole, stiff in the cold. His breath curls out in small clouds, but he keeps his hands still at his sides. This first test, simple waiting, is meant to teach him that silence and patience are the roots of strength. Inside the longhouse, his grandmother's fire crackles low. The elders believe that fire's rhythm teaches lessons just as the tide does, to be steady and enduring. To break silence before being spoken to is to show the weakness of hunger, not for food, but for attention. In Kwakwaka'wakwa teaching, that hunger is dangerous. It leads to boasting and recklessness, all traits that pull a person away from harmony with others. When the elder finally speaks, the young man bows slightly and listens. His training will last through the winter months, when daylight is brief and the world feels small. He will be told when to speak, when to eat, and when to move. The lessons are not written or explained outright. They are lived through experience, through repetition. In this way, discipline and self-control become part of his nature, rather than a rule that he must remember. As the morning brightens to a dull blue, he follows a narrow trail up the hill, behind the village. The ground is slick with frost, and the smell of cedar bark and seaweed lingers in the air. He carries a small bundle wrapped in woven grass. It's food for later, though it will not be touched until the sun drops low and his elders say he may touch it. The path leads him to a clearing where several other young men stand apart from one another. They do not speak or wave at him. Instead, they each face different directions, watching the forest as though waiting for it to speak first. Every day, the elders assign them small, quiet trials. One day it might be to stay awake through the night, listening for the sounds of owls without moving. Another day it might be to carve a piece of driftwood into a smooth paddle, using only patience and a dull blade. Through these tasks, they learn that strength is never loud, and mastery cannot be rushed. The smallest tremor in the hand while carving, or the faintest sign of restlessness during stillness is noticed. The elders will see everything. The young man's stomach growls already, but he remembers the rules. Hunger is not an enemy. Hunger teaches how much the body controls the mind. When the cold seeps in and his fingers stiffen, he does not complain. Complaining draws warmth away from the spirit. It makes discipline thin and fragile. The Kwakwaka'wakwa say that the human spirit must be kept like a fire, protected, not wasted in noise and not smothered. When evening comes, he walks back towards the glow of the longhouses. The path smells of damp moss now, and his breath fogs the air. Inside the longhouses, families are preparing food. The scent of smoked salmon and roasted clams drifts through the cracks in the cedar boards. But he will not eat. Instead, he sits quietly near the edge of the firelight, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. His mother silently places a small carved figure beside him, a guardian that represents self-restraint, shaped like a bird whose wings are folded tightly against its sides. It's a reminder that even a creature made for flight must know when to be still. He watches the older men seated near the fire. Their faces are calm and their movements are measured. None of them rush to speak, and when they share their words, it's slow and deliberate. The young man begins to notice that this calmness holds more weight than strength in the arms or sharpness in the eyes. To be truly respected, one must not chase recognition, but earn it by being steady and reliable. Discipline is not a performance, it's a quiet consistency that everyone feels. Outside, the night grows heavy with mist. He steps out again, hearing the rhythmic beat of a log drum echoing from another longhouse where a ritual is beginning. It's not for him to join yet. His duty is to remain apart and watch. Each drumbeat seems to test his resolve. The sound is warm and welcoming, a reminder of joy and community. Yet restraint requires that he listen without stepping forward. Learning to stay still when pleasure calls is one of the earliest and hardest lessons. When the fire starts burning low, the young man lies on a mat near the doorway, not yet allowed to sleep deeply. Sleep itself is also to be trained. He must rest lightly, ready to rise before dawn when the elders summon them again. The cold air brushes across his cheek, and he listens to the faint hiss of the tide returning to the shore. The silence feels alive. He senses that this long winter will not simply test his endurance, but shape who he will become in the eyes of his people. As he drifts into shallow sleep, the carved bird figure remains at his side, his hand gripping it tightly. The soft crackle of cedar in the fire fills the longhouse, and faintly outside, a raven calls through the fog. Its echo fades across the inlet, carrying with it a quiet rhythm of the world where patience and humility are the foundations of manhood. The first temptations arrive during the feast. The main longhouse fills with sound, laughter, and the deep thudding of drums that make the cedar walls shake a little. Smoke curls upwards through the roof vent, and the smell of roasted salmon and grease from Ulashan oil makes the air heavy. Everyone eats, elders dipping dried fish into bowls of rich oil, children laughing as they reach for clams still steaming from the fire. For the young men under training, this is one of the hardest tests. They sit nearby, watching and breathing it in, making their mouths water, but they are not yet allowed to eat. This is not a punishment. This shapes their behavior. Elders say the greatest danger to a person's spirit is not hunger, but indulgence. In the old teachings, the glutton is a spirit that swells and dulls the heart, a creature that always asks for more. A person who eats without restraint becomes heavy not only in body, but in will. The discipline taught here is that abundance must never rule over gratitude. The young man reminds himself that every fish caught was once a life taken from the water, and each bite must be respected, not consumed in greed. The feast continues around him. The dancers enter the open space in the longhouse, their masks painted in bold colors, red, black, and white. The designs twist and move under the firelight, eagles and wolves, whales even. The songs speak of ancestors, hunts, and winter survival. The drums beat in a steady rhythm, and he feels the sound inside his chest. His stomach growls again, but he holds still. The discipline he builds here will matter later, when his body's needs try to control him in the wild or during ceremony. An elder moves past him, carrying a cedar ladle filled with broth. The young man catches the scent of dried kelp and smoked cod. His throat tightens and his mouth dries, then begins to salivate heavily again. But he looks away. His task tonight is to serve, not eat. He carries wood for the fire, replaces bark when the flames die down, and keeps the floor clean of ash. When people look at him, he nods in acknowledgement but does not speak. A single word out of turn would be considered a crack in his discipline. His restraint is both physical and social, holding back his hunger and his impulse. When the feast ends, he helps wash the dishes in cold water near the entrance. The liquid burns his fingers with chill, but he keeps working. His stomach aches, yet his focus stays on the task. The Kwakwakawakwa believe that restraint sharpens awareness. A person who eats little sees more clearly. They say that the eyes of the fasting man can see the truth of things hidden to others. How a person's spirit sits in their shoulders. How a bird's flight predicts the next day of weather. How the current in the river speaks of its salmon and whether they run. The next morning, before the sun fully rises, the elder calls them to gather outside the longhouse. The air is cold and clean. The young man's legs are weak, but he stands straight and forces his knees to lock. They are each given a small portion of dried seaweed and one piece of smoked fish, no more than a few bites. The elder tells them that this is not a meal, it is simply a reminder. Food, he says, is not to fill your body, it is to honor your body. The young man chews slowly, feeling the salt sting his tongue almost. He realizes how quickly gratitude fades when food is plentiful, and how deep it runs when every bite matters. Later that day, the women prepare another great meal for a community gathering. He helps carve a long wooden plank for serving the fish. The other young men whisper about how much they miss the taste of oil or sweet berries, but he stays silent. He looks at their faces and sees the impatience in their eyes. The elders walk by and notice everything. The smallest flicker of restlessness is like a spark in dry bark. It tells them who is still wrestling with temptation. As the evening returns, drums sound again, but softer this time. The young men are invited to stand before the elders, watching how food is distributed. The first servings always go to the highest-ranking guests, then to the elders, then to the children, and lastly to everyone else. This order is a physical reminder of respect. To eat early or to take more than one's share is to insult the entire line of ancestors who kept the community alive through hardship. The young man's hunger is sharp now, but he stands without moving. He watches the older men again, taking them as a source of strength. When the elders finally motion to him, he steps forward. A small bowl of soup is handed to him, fish broth mixed with berries and wild onion. The smell nearly makes him tremble. He kneels before eating, as is custom, bringing the bowl close to his lips. He breathes in once, then takes a slow sip. The warmth spreads through him, and he feels both relief and control. He does not eat fast. That night, when the longhouse grows quiet, he lies awake. His stomach is still not full, but his mind is clear. The elder's lessons begin to take shape in his thoughts, that the appetite for food is the same as the appetite for anything else. It grows stronger when unrestrained. Gluttony, lust, pride, all are different faces of the same hunger. The way to master one is to learn to master all. He learns to listen to the distant sound of the tide coming in, steady and rhythmic like the drums from earlier. The sea does not rush to fill itself. It moves in rhythm, always returning, but never needing to rush. He understands then why the elders say discipline is not denial, but harmony. It is a way of moving with the rhythm of life rather than against it. As the fire dies down to red embers, he rolls over, the faint salt of the broth still on his lips. The scent of cedar smoke lingers, mixing with the sea breeze that slips through the wall gaps. In this half-darkness, with hunger soft but constant, he begins to feel the first quiet satisfaction of control, the understanding that true strength looks like restraint, even while surrounded with abundance. The winter ceremonies last for many weeks. Each night is filled with dance, drumming, and the smell of burning cedar bark. The longhouse is warm from the central fire, and the air feels thick with smoke and the sound of voices. For the young men who are still in training, this is when the harder lessons begin. After learning how to control hunger, they are now taught to resist two deeper temptations, lust and pride. Elders explain that these are the forces that often destroy a person's balance. A man who cannot control them loses respect, both from his community and from the spirits that watch over him. The longhouse is full of movement. Dancers wear large carved masks painted in bright red and black. The masks represent spirits that test the hearts of people, spirits that stir desire, greed, or arrogance. One of the dancers moves in slow circles around the fire, shaking cedar bark from his shoulders as the drum beat deepens. The young man watches closely. He knows the dance is meant to remind them that temptation is not only in the body, it begins in the mind, in the way a person looks at the world. He sits among other trainees in silence, his body still and his eyes lowered. He listens to the rhythm of the drum instead of following the dancer's movements. The test is simple. Remain calm while the sights and sounds of the ceremony are meant to provoke emotion. In Kwakwaka'wakwa teachings, lust is not just about desire between people. It also means greed, wanting what is not meant for you. The same spirit that causes lust also feeds pride, and that is why both are trained together. The young men are taught that a person who brags about their skill or strength is as unbalanced as any who lets their desires control them. Later that night, when the dances end, the young men sit with the elders. The room is quieter now, and only the sound of firewood cracking fills the longhouse. The eldest man speaks slowly while carving a small wooden mask. He explains that desire itself is not evil. If anything, it reminds people they're alive and capable of feeling. The danger begins when a person chases it too eagerly. Lust, greed, and pride all grow from the same root, the wish to be seen and to be admired. A person who controls these things keeps their spirit clean and steady. The next day, the young men are asked to perform small demonstrations of their progress. Each must choose something to do: sing a song, carve wood, or dance before the group. The lesson is not to impress others, but to practice humility without falling into mediocrity. When the young man's turn comes, he chooses carving. He shapes a piece of cedar into a small whale, working with steady hands. The elders watch but make sure not to say anything. This silence is also to teach him that true discipline does not depend on other people's approval. A man must learn to be content with his own effort. Afterwards, he walks down to the river to clean his tools. The water is so cold that it stings, and when he looks down, he sees his reflection shaking in the current. It reminds him that pride can disturb a person's peace in the same way that wind disturbs the surface of the water. He whispers a short prayer to the river, then gets up and walks back. That evening, the next test begins. The young men are placed near the fire again, but this time the longhouse is full of music and laughter. Women join the gathering, their hair decorated with small shells and cedar fibers that glimmer. The air is filled with warmth and sound. The young men are told to keep their heads lowered, to speak little but show respect. Their discipline is not tested through struggle, but closeness. They are surrounded by comfort, yet they must learn to remain still and respectful. The young man notices one of the women smiling in his direction. His first instinct is to look back, but he stops himself. He focuses on his breathing instead. The elders watch quietly, with approval on their mind. They know that resisting temptation is not about rejection. It's simply holding one's strength steady when you have a duty. In Kwakwaka'wakwa life, restraint is considered a form of respect. It shows that a person is disciplined enough to avoid selfishness in their thoughts. The following day, the young men are instructed to remain silent for 2 full days. They are allowed to work, eat, and move about, but not to speak. The purpose of this test is to quiet their pride. When people speak too much, they often speak of themselves. Silence removes the chance to boast. It forces the mind to listen before acting. The young man finds this part difficult. He wants to share his thoughts with the others, to make small jokes or comment on the weather. But each time the urge rises, he remembers that silence is a big part of the lesson. The elders say that when a person learns to control their words, they also learn to control their actions. The 2 days pass and the silence ends. The elders ask each young man what he has learned. This young man says that holding back words is harder than holding back hunger. The elder smiles and replies that this is how strength grows. When a person is exposed to their own weakness, their own personal challenge, and they learn to think before they speak. In the following nights, the young man begins to notice changes in himself. He no longer counts how many times he resists a temptation. Instead, discipline begins to feel natural. The thing that once seemed like tests now feels like everyday life. He moves slower and reacts less quickly. He starts to understand that discipline is not about saying no. It's about knowing when to act and when to stay still. Outside the longhouse, the snow continues to fall. The young man steps into the cold night and looks at the inlet. The moonlight reflects on the calm water, and he stands there quietly, feeling the cold on his skin. He realizes that this temptation will never disappear, but he can decide how to face it. He stays there for a long moment, listening to the distant sound of waves breaking against the shore. The night feels peaceful instead of empty. The coldest part of winter has arrived now, without any warning. Frost spreads across the beach like white sand, and the river turns sluggish under the sheets of ice. Each morning, before the sun touches the inlet, the young men wake for their cleansing practice. They walk together in silence, carrying only small bundles of cedar twigs. The path leads through tall spruce trees to the river, where the water runs cold and fast even in winter. The sound of it fills the valley. This part of training is called self-purification. It is both physical and spiritual. Every morning before sunrise, each young man must strip down to his waist and wade into the freezing water. The act is not for endurance alone. It represents the washing away of weakness, the mind's impatience, the body's laziness, and the heart's fear. The young man steps into the river, gasping as the chill reaches his bones. The water is sharp, like hundreds of tiny needles pressing against his skin. He lowers himself slowly, breathing through the shock. The river takes his breath away, but he remains still. Around him, the others do the same, their silhouettes faint in the morning mist. The only sound are their breathing and the steady rush of water. After a few moments, the elder's voice rises from the banks. The river listens to the quiet mind. Breathe slowly. The young man follows the instruction, his chest burning, but he keeps his focus on the rhythm of his breath. The lesson is simple. Pain is not an enemy either, but a teacher. It tells the body where its limits are and how the spirit should move beyond them. Each morning in the cold water teaches him that control is about acceptance. When they emerge, the air feels even colder. Steam rises from their skin. They quickly dry off using cedar branches, rubbing to bring warmth back. The smell of the wood mixes with the sharp scent of the river, creating a clean freshness. Before returning, they give thanks by dipping the cedar twigs once more into the current, letting the river carry them away. Back in the longhouse, they sit quietly near the fire. No one speaks for the first hour after cleansing. This silence is part of the ritual, a way to keep the mind calm and the body focused. The warmth of the fire feels deeper after the shock of the river. The young man feels tired but alert. He notices small details he once ignored. The way the smoke curls before escaping through the vent, how light moves along the carved beams overhead. The elders tell them that when the body is purified, awareness sharpens. The world becomes clearer and thoughts lose their noise. The practice repeats every day. Sometimes the ice on the river must be broken before they can enter. The young men use sticks or stones to clear a small space wide enough to stand in. The act of breaking the ice itself becomes part of the test. It reminds them that nothing worth learning comes without effort. The young man's skin grows tougher, and his tolerance for cold deepens, but what matters most is his growing calmness. Fear is being replaced. One morning, the river is unusually high. The current pulls hard, making it dangerous to stand still. The young man hesitates before stepping in. The water feels stronger than before, tugging at his legs now. The elder calls out from the shore, reminding them that balance begins inside the mind. The young man steadies his breathing and lowers himself further. For a brief moment, he feels as if the river might carry him away, but he focuses on the sound instead. The rush of the rhythm, the constant movement. He realizes the river is not trying to harm him. It simply flows as it always has. When he finally climbs out, his hands tremble, but his face remains calm. The elder nods, very satisfied. The river does not test you, he says. You test yourself. That simple statement becomes something the young man often repeats in his mind. Later that day, he helps repair fishing nets near the shore. The cold has numbed his fingers, but he still works carefully. The older men tell stories about their own youth, about times when they felt weak and learned patience through the same winter rituals. They explain that cleansing is preparation for the challenges of adulthood. There will always be hunger, always be work, always be loss and uncertainty. Every hardship in life feels easier after standing in freezing water before dawn. It teaches that discomfort does not last forever, but courage can. In the evenings when he sits by the fire, the young man notices that warmth now feels like a reward, not a given. The cold has taught him to appreciate more. He drinks a small cup of warm broth and feels it travel slowly through his body. He thinks of the river again, the way it moves without anger or hesitation. The elders often compare people to rivers. Both can be calm or violent, shallow or deep. By the end of the week, he can stay in the cold water longer than before. His breathing is steady, and his mind feels clear. He doesn't think of the practice as suffering anymore. He thinks of it as cleaning. Every morning removes something unnecessary from him: fear, impatience, or pride. The moon grows full after many nights, and the frost on the rooftops glitters in the night. The longhouse smells of cedar and drying fish. When the young man wakes before dawn for the next cleansing, he no longer hesitates before sitting up. The sound of the river greets him like an old friend. He steps into the icy water and just closes his eyes. The shock fades quickly now. When he walks back through the forest after he's done, the first birds begin to call. The ground crackles under his feet, and his breath leaves white clouds in the air. The elder walks behind him in silence. The cold morning light is filtering through the trees, and his presence is reassuring. In that quiet walk home, the young man feels both small and strong. He understands why the Kwakwaka'wakwa teach cleansing, to teach the heart that peace is earned through effort and endurance. When the moon begins to shrink again, the young man's training shifts to a quieter, lonelier phase. The elders tell him he must now spend several nights alone in the forest. It is meant to test his courage against what lives in his own mind, the feelings, the thoughts, the fears. They say the spirits often speak to those who are alone, and only those who are calm and clear can listen properly. He leaves the longhouse before sunset. The air is crisp and smells of sea salt. The elders give him only a small blanket, a knife, and a few pieces of dried salmon. They tell him to find a place near running water and to return only when he feels truly at peace with the forest. The young man nods and walks past the last row of cedar houses. Behind him, the steady sound of the village fades until only the wind and his footsteps remain in his ear. He follows a narrow trail through the trees. The forest grows darker with every step, but the path feels familiar. The ground is soft with needles and damp leaves, and the trunks of the trees rise tall and close together. When he reaches a small clearing beside a stream, he decides to stop. The stream's surface shines faintly in the dim light, and the sound of water moving over rocks fills the quiet in a pleasant way. As night falls, he builds a small fire using the dry cedar bark and decides it's here that he will stay. The light flickers across the trunks, and his breath makes small clouds in the air. He eats a little dried fish and then sits cross-legged near the flames. The forest around him hums with faint sounds. Owls calling, branches shifting in the wind, the splash of something small in the stream. It's not fear that keeps him awake, but alertness. He feels as though the forest is watching him, waiting to see if he belongs there. The elders warned him that spirits sometimes come to test those who train alone. They do not appear as monsters, but whispers, tricks of the light. They can make a person believe they are being followed, or that something is moving just beyond sight. The young man remembers the elders' advice. When you hear them, do not answer. When you see them, do not chase. Keep your thoughts quiet, and these things will leave you. As the fire burns lower, he begins to hear faint sounds between the trees, like soft voices, almost like laughter. His chest tightens, and his first instinct is to look around, but he stops himself. He knows this is the test. He closes his eyes and listens instead to the stream. The steady rush of water fills his ears until the voices fade. When he opens his eyes again, the forest feels still once more. He adds more wood to the fire and breathes slowly until his heart quiets down. They are taught that fear is a shadow on the spirit. It is not able to be destroyed, but can be understood. The elders teach that courage comes when a person can sit with fear and let it pass through without letting it control them. This is what the young man practices now. Each sound in the dark becomes a small test: the snap of a twig, the distant call of a wolf, the whisper of wind through the branches. Each time he resists the urge to react, he feels his spirit grow steadier. By the second night, he has stopped feeling afraid of the dark. Instead, he simply notices the details of the forest: the soft crackling of frost forming on the ground, the smell of wet cedar rising when the air warms slightly. He starts to feel connected to everything around him, as if the forest is breathing with him. That night, a light rain falls. The fire sputters and dies, leaving him in complete darkness. He wraps the blanket around his shoulders and sits still. The forest feels vast and full of movement, but he doesn't panic, just listens. Somewhere above him, an owl calls 3 times. The sound echoes through the trees. In their stories, the owl is a messenger spirit that warns but also teaches. It reminds people that knowledge often comes during silence. When dawn comes, the forest is coated in silver mist. The young man's fingers are stiff with cold, but he still feels calm. He walks down to the stream and washes his face. The water stings, but it also cleanses. The light is soft, and thin layers of ice are floating along the edges of the current. The forest no longer feels like something outside of him. He feels like an extension of it, and that the silence has become peaceful. He spends one more night there. This time, the sounds do not unsettle him at all. When something moves beyond the trees, he simply watches. When shadows flicker, he lets them pass. His heart stays steady now, and his breath is still slow. The fear that once made his hands shake now feels distant, almost small. By the time he returns to the village, 4 mornings have passed. The elders are waiting near the longhouse. They ask no questions, they only need to look at his face. They can tell he has changed. His eyes are calm and his shoulders are relaxed. He bows his head slightly as a sign of respect. The eldest man places a hand on his shoulder and says, "You have listened to the forest. That means you have begun to be able to hear yourself." That night, as he sits by the communal fire, the young man realizes how different noise feels after silence. The laughter, the talking, and the crackling wood all sound clearer, like separate layers of one voice. He feels grateful to be home. After returning from his days in the forest, the young man is not yet allowed to rest. His next stage of discipline begins, and it focuses on steady work. The elders say that labor reveals who still carries pride and who has learned patience. Each morning begins early, before the first light touches the inlet. The tasks are simple but endless. The elders tell them to chop wood for the longhouses, to clean tools, mend fishing nets, carry water, carve new paddles. None of this work is glamorous. It's the kind that never earns praise because it simply must be done every day. The elders explain that these duties are how a person proves their steadiness. A proud man wants to be noticed. A disciplined one simply does what needs to be done. The young man learns quickly that the hardest part is not the work itself, but the repetition. The same nets are repaired again and again, even when they look fine. The same piles of firewood are restacked so they dry evenly. Every mistake is corrected patiently. And when his arms ache or his hands blister, he is told not to complain. The elders remind him that a person who complains has forgotten gratitude. Work is a gift, not a punishment. Throughout the day, he listens to the older men talk while they carve. Their voices are low and steady, filled with humor that is quiet. He realizes that they are connected to each other and to the generations before them and after them through their work. They tell stories about their youth. One man recalls cutting too fast while shaping a canoe plank and ruining it after a week of effort. The young man understands that mistakes made in haste are worse than mistakes made in ignorance. When the tide goes out, he joins a group to collect shellfish along the shore. The rocks are cold and slippery underfoot. The air smells of seaweed and the gulls are crying above. They work silently, moving with rhythm. Each man reaches down, fills his small basket, but never taking more than what can be used. The elders explain that greed during harvest is a spiritual imbalance. The ocean is generous, but it is also angry and cruel to those who don't respect its limits. The young man remembers this lesson every time he reaches for another clam. He leaves a few untouched, even when his basket doesn't look totally full. In the evenings, the work continues by lamplight. Cedar chips cover the ground as they carve masks and tools. The air is warm and they smell nothing but fresh wood. The young man watches how the elders handle their knives, never forcing the blade or rushing. They carve as if the shape already lives inside the wood and only needs to be uncovered. He realizes that every movement, even in small or short tasks, teaches balance and awareness. On days when the weather turns rough, they work indoors. The young men sit together repairing fishing nets or weaving rope. Their fingers move automatically, guided by the repetition. The sound is soft and steady, like rain on bark. The elders walk among them, correcting small mistakes, adjusting knots, or explaining how each part of the net carries weight differently. Being told you are wrong is not shameful, the young man learns. Simply refusing to learn is. Once, near sunset, the young man drops his knife by accident. It clatters across the floor, and for a moment he feels embarrassment rise in his chest. He expects laughter or scolding, but the elders beside him simply nod and say, "Pick it up slowly." That calm response teaches him more than any lecture. Discipline is quiet even when mistakes happen. Emotion and frustration are just waves. They pass if you wait. Days blend together like threads in a woven mat. The work never stops, and he begins to feel that the rhythm of his labor matches the rhythm of the world around him. The tide comes and goes, the fire burns and fades, people wake and work and then rest. The predictability is bringing him peace now. He starts to enjoy the sound of his own tools, the chop of the axe, the scrape of his knife, the hiss of the fire when a wet log is added. What once felt like tedious routine now feels like harmony. At the end of one long day, the young men are told to prepare the next morning's tasks without being asked. The elders watch quietly to see who remembers what to do. This young man organizes the tools, sweeps the floor, and arranges the firewood. The older men notice and give him silent approval. Later that week, a storm arrives. Rain falls for days, and the rivers swell. Fishing is impossible, so the young men work indoors, tightening ropes and drying gear. The young man feels the weight of fatigue, but keeps working. The elders test them by delaying mealtime, seeing who grows restless first. Hunger returns as another teacher. One night, when the storm finally clears, the village gathers around a large fire to rest. This young man sits quietly, his hands sore and his eyes heavy. He watches sparks rise into the night and realizes how much he has changed. The rhythm of work has taught him to slow his thoughts. He no longer rushes to finish anything. The elders often say that work done without focus carries no spirit. As he looks at the nets and tools made during the long weeks, he understands that every item carries a story, the patience and discipline of the one who made it or rebuilt it. When he finally lies down to sleep, the waves outside are hitting the shore in another slow rhythm, and the sound comforts him. It is now springtime, and as it begins to touch the edges of the inlet, the young man's training is nearing its end. The elders are preparing the final test to show how much discipline he has gained. This test is not about isolation or endurance, it's about demonstration. The young men must now each take part in a ceremonial dance, where every movement must reflect calmness and control, their balance in essence. The ceremony is both sacred and practical. It tells the community who is ready to take on responsibility as a disciplined adult. In the days before the event, the longhouse becomes a place of quiet preparation. The elders strip and soak cedar barks to make skirts for the dancers. The young men carve their masks and shape wooden rattles. These masks do not represent people but spirits, creatures of the forest and ocean. Their designs are precise, red and black and white. Each detail has its own meaning. The young man's mask is a simple one, a raven, a creature known for intelligence and trickery. It is chosen for him because the raven teaches about control. For 2 nights before the ceremony, he eats very little and speaks even less. The fasting keeps his mind clear and his body light. Elders tell him that before one can represent balance through dance, one must first quiet the inner noise that pushes for attention. Even after all his training, some of his thoughts may attempt to break through. On the morning of the ceremony, the village gathers inside the great longhouse. Firelight flicks across the carved posts as shadows climb the walls high. The drums begin to sound, a steady rhythm deep in their chests. The rhythm mimics the beat of the human heart. It's the same rhythm the young men have trained to hear in their silence, their hunger, their cold mornings. The young man steps forward, wearing the raven mask and a cedar bark skirt. His movements must show what months of discipline have taught him. He moves slowly at first. His feet gently guide across the packed earth floor. His arms extend like wings, rising and falling in rhythm with the drums. Every motion feels deliberate. When the music speeds up, he does not rush, he simply tempos up with it. When it slows, he follows calmly. The elders watch closely because they are not judging beauty or power, but his steadiness in rhythm. The young man must show that his mind stays centered no matter what changes around him. As he dances, the mask grows warm against his skin. He feels sweat on his forehead, but his breathing stays even. The drum beat doesn't vibrate through his chest now only, but through the floor. Around him, other dancers join in. One as a wolf, one as an eagle, another as a killer whale, all moving in patterns that represent harmony between the natural and spiritual worlds. When his part ends, the young man kneels and removes his mask. He holds it in both hands, his head bowed. The elders begin to sing an old song about the first ancestors who learned control through hardship. The sound is deep and calm, carried by the rhythm of clapping and the steady beat of the drum. Afterwards, the elders speak to the gathered people. They explain that every trial was not meant to break the young men, but to refine them. Each hardship removed what was unnecessary so that discipline could take root. The dance shows the result. Their steady movements, calm focus, and respect for all things. When the ceremony ends, the young men sit near the fire. No one congratulates them loudly, but everyone smiles in their direction and shares their food, each portion given with purpose. The young man eats slowly, feeling gratitude and community in each bite. The discipline he has practiced for months now feels natural. He no longer needs to remind himself to stay calm or patient. He simply does. Later that night, after the longhouse empties, he walks outside. The tide is low, and the sand shines faintly under the moonlight. He carries the raven mask with him, turning it over in his hands. He understands why the elders chose this spirit for him. The raven is clever, but must use its cleverness carefully. It represents the balance between curiosity and intelligent restraint. He kneels by the water and rinses the mask, letting the tide wash over it. The Kwakwaka'wakwa believe that everything borrowed from nature must be returned, even in small ways. So the act of washing is symbolic, cleansing the last traces of the ceremony and returning the spirit of the mask to the world. Back in the village, the elders sit together outside one of the longhouses. They talk slowly, watching the smoke drift into the night. The eldest man looks towards this young man returning and says he has learned. His steps are slower, his eyes are steady. He is a man now. The young man enters his family longhouse and lies down near the dying fire. The sound of waves reaches him faintly through the walls. He absorbs the warmth of the fire slowly, and he drifts towards sleep knowing that the hardest part of his training is over. Outside, the drums from other houses continues faintly, echoing through the cold air. The rhythm is slow and constant, like a heartbeat. The young man's training has ended now, with the last traces of winter melted away. The river runs stronger now, free of ice. The mornings are brighter, and smoke from the longhouses rises straight into the sky. The elders gather all the trained youth in front of the village to perform one final act. Not a ceremony, but a quiet sharing of responsibility. This is the moment when they are no longer boys. They are expected to live the discipline they have learned and teach it by example. The young man stands among them, his shoulders broad and posture calm. He no longer fidgets or glances around for approval. One elder approaches and places a small carved pendant in his hand. It is made from bone and shaped like a salmon, a symbol of persistence and renewal. The elder tells him that the salmon's strength lies in its endurance and its ability to run with the current. In the following weeks, life returns to its ordinary rhythm. The village becomes busy again with fishing, trading, and preparing food. The young man works beside the older men now, his actions as measured and consistent as theirs. When others speak quickly or argue, he stays silent until he has thought through his words. When food is served, he waits for the elders to take their share before reaching. The young man begins helping to teach the younger boys now how to work the nets and carve wood. He notices how quickly they tire, how they rush to finish their work, and how frustration rises when things do not go their way. Just as he has learned, he does not scold them, but instead shows them how to slow down and breathe through their tasks. The younger ones listen, some impatiently, but they notice how steady his hands remain even after hours of work, and just how much work he's able to finish. The example speaks louder than his words. Each evening he walks down to the river. The sound of running water brings back memories of the cold mornings he once dreaded. Now he steps into the stream without hesitation. The chill feels natural, almost welcoming. He uses the time to reflect on his day and to remind himself that this training never truly ends. Discipline untrained will rust, just like anything. During one of the village feasts, he notices how different his feelings are from the year before. The food is plentiful and the music's loud, but the hunger that once tested him no longer pulls at his thoughts. He simply eats slowly, sharing happily with the others, watching how the children laugh and the elders smile. That night, he sits outside his family longhouse, listening to the ocean. The air is cool, and somewhere nearby, children are laughing, their voices carrying through the dark. He feels the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat and finds great comfort in it. As the fire beside him fades to glowing coals, he realizes the tests truly were about learning how to remain calm and steady in every part of his life so that his community could rely on him. He throws a small handful of cedar bark into the fire when he stands up. The smoke rises straight up before spreading into the night sky. This gesture is his final offering of thanks to the elders who taught him, to the spirits that watched, and to the discipline that now sits within him and keeps him balanced. Each step of this journey, from resisting hunger to enduring cold water to staying calm in a dark forest, teaches that true strength is made of control, patience, and gratitude. The rooster's call breaks the quiet morning. Smoke rises from a small chimney, thin at first, but now growing steadily stronger. Inside the wooden house, the air smells of firewood and grain. A young girl sits beside her mother, still sleepy under her wool blanket. Her grandmother moves slowly near the stove, already busy. The three of them share the same early rhythm. Each morning begins the same way, with work before sunrise. The hearth is the center of the home. It gives heat, cooks their food, and lights the room. And the fire never fully goes out. Before sleeping, they bury glowing coals under the ash so it can live through the night. At dawn, the mother blows gently until it burns again. She sees sparks rise and then the fire catches. The girl's first job is to sweep the ashes. Her broom is made of birch twigs tied together with string. She sweeps from the stove outward, just as her mother taught her. Sweeping the other way would send good fortune out the door, people say. The lesson is simple. Every action has meaning. The small window lets in the first light of day. The room is full of simple things: wooden shelves, clay pots on their table, and hanging herbs. A small saint's icon stands in the corner, darkened from years of smoke. The family's life happens around these objects. The grandmother crosses herself before stirring the pot of morning porridge, and the sound of the spoon touching the pot is steady. Outside, frost covers the ground. Chickens scratch near the doorway, and a cow moves and mewls inside the barn. The girl steps out wearing thick felt boots. Her mother shows her how to feed the animals, how to scatter the grain, and talk softly so they stay calm. The grandmother once said that milk can sour if the cow is spoken to harshly. In these villages, learning comes through doing. Mothers rarely explain with many words. They perform the action and demonstrate, and then the daughter watches, copies, and tries to remember. She learns how to milk the cow, how to keep the pail clean, and how to pour the milk carefully from seeing her mother's measured actions. She reminds the girl to offer the first drop of milk to the floor near the threshold to keep the home spirits pleased. These small customs protect the house, whether literally or at least in the minds of the people. By mid-morning, the house warms up. The smell of barley porridge fills the room. Steam clouds the window until nothing outside can be seen. The girl shells peas into a bowl, while her mother hums an old song. Her grandmother sits nearby, weaving a rug. Each sound blends into a quiet rhythm, creating a symphony of home care and domestic love. When a visitor enters, warmth is the first thing offered. The girl learns to pour tea from the samovar, the large metal kettle that always steams at the edge of the stove. Her grandmother reminds her that elders must drink first if it's a group of visitors, and the tea should never be cold. These small rules teach respect and good manners. Every household shares them, whether rich or poor. Sometimes the girl watches young men walking past the fence and wonders what lies beyond the birch trees in the forest. But her grandmother dismisses this and says the house itself is a world full of memory. The walls hold laughter, and the stove's warmth ties everyone together. It is love made real through effort. The sunlight reaches the floorboards then, turning the ash from the fire pit into a silvery color. The girl's hands are gray from sweeping, but her eyes are bright. She begins to see how each action connects the next. Feeding animals, tending the fire, cooking, cleaning. There's comfort in the order of it. Her mother's voice breaks the quiet, soft but sure. A clean hearth, a fed cow, a warm meal, that's a good start to any day. They eat breakfast at a wooden table, bowls steaming. The grandmother says a short prayer before the first bite. It's mostly grain and salt, but it feels warm and fulfilling nonetheless. Outside, frost still covers the fields, but the inside of the home glows with warmth and life. The girl looks at her mother and grandmother and feels a quiet pride. Soon she will know these tasks by heart. The fire snaps inside the stove. A small ember lands on a brick and fades. The girl smells the ash on her sleeves and in her hair, and she understands what her grandmother means when she calls the fire the heart of the house. It is steady and always waiting to be cared for. The morning chores are finished when the mother hands the girl a wooden yoke. It's light but awkward, built to rest across the shoulders and hold 2 buckets on chains. Fetching water is one of the most common duties in the household, and it must be done every day, no matter the weather. The girl steps outside, her boots crunching on the frozen path, and follows her mother towards the well at the edge of the village. The well sits in a small clearing where several footpaths meet. Its roof is made of old boards, and a bucket hangs from a rope wound across a wooden spindle. The cold air smells of damp earth, and a thin layer of frost glitters on the handle of the bucket. Other women are already there, talking in low voices as they wait for their turn. The girl stands beside her mother, watching as one woman lowers her bucket into the dark hole. The sound of the rope sliding down and the bucket striking water is sharp and clear. The well is more than a place to collect water, though. It's a heart of the village where people exchange news and stories and short bits of advice. Mothers warn children not to play too close to the edge, and old women whisper that a spirit lives below. An unseen vodyanoi who guards the water and dislikes careless visitors. Some say it pulls down those who speak too loudly or spit into the well. Because of this, every girl is taught to approach it calmly, to keep her voice low, and make a small sign of respect before drawing water. The girl's mother shows her how to turn the handle slowly. The rope creaks and the bucket rises, dripping with cold water that smells of iron and stone. She pours the first few drops onto the ground beside the well. A simple gesture meant to please the guardian spirit and show that any action is taken with intent and not carelessness. The girl copies her mother's motion, steady but cautious. Her small hands turn red from gripping in the cold, and her breath forms small clouds in the air. Around them, other women continue their work. They're wearing long skirts tucked into boots, scarves wrapped tightly around their heads, and thick wool coats to block the wind. Each one moves with a steady pace born from years of habit. They greet each other with small nods, and the girl notices how they rarely stop talking even as they work. Their words mix with the sounds of buckets splashing, and laughter rises now and then like a little spark of flame in the cold. When the girl's turn comes, her mother lets her lower the bucket herself. The rope slides rough against her palms, and she can feel it scratching. She winces and feels the weight pull, then grow lighter when it hits water. Her mother tells her to lift slowly so it doesn't spill. Once it reaches the top, the girl steadies it with both hands. Water drips a little bit from the metal rim, and she feels proud, even if her arms ache. They begin the walk home with full buckets swaying from the yoke. The mother moves first, careful not to let the water slosh too much. The girl follows behind, trying to match her steps. The path is uneven, marked with frozen ruts from carts and footprints. Each step must be watched, and each turn taken with care. If too much water spills, the trip must be repeated. Her grandmother says that careless feet make for double the work. Along the way, they passed small gardens fenced with woven branches, now empty and covered with frost. Smoke rises from nearby chimneys, and the smell of burning wood mixes with the faint scent of laundry soap. The girl asks her mother why the water from the well is better than the stream behind the house. The well is deep and protected, her mother says. Its water is pure enough for drinking and even bread making. The stream is only for washing clothes and bathing animals. When they reach the yard, the mother lowers her buckets beside the kitchen door. The girl sets hers down too, though water sloshes over the edge a little and freezes on the ground. Her mother says nothing, but lifts one of the buckets and pours some water into a clay pot for cooking. The girl feels her shoulders ache, but says nothing. Her mother looks at her and gives her a short nod. "Tomorrow," she says, "you'll carry both." Inside the house, the air is warmer and filled with the smell of baked rye. The girl sets her yoke near the door, and her grandmother glances at it, satisfied for a first time. The older woman reminds her that water must always be fetched before sunset, never after, because evening water was believed to carry bad luck or bring illness. Some families even throw a pinch of salt into the bucket before dark to guard against misfortune. The girl listens carefully, storing the rule in her mind with all the others she's already learned. The next morning she rises early again, but alone this time. Her mother lets her walk alone as well. The road is empty except for the crows perched on fence posts. She keeps her pace steady, remembering each word of instruction. When she reaches the well, she touches the rim lightly before lowering the bucket and mutters under her breath, her version of the prayer. The sound of water echoes below, calm and deep. For a moment she stands still, transfixed and watching the surface ripple. It feels like looking into another world. Then she lifts the bucket, pours a few drops onto the ground, and smiles slightly to herself that she didn't spill more than that. Carrying the water home is much harder without her mother's help, but she manages. Her boots leave small marks in the frost, and her breath comes out in clouds. By the time she reaches the door, her arms tremble, but the buckets are still mostly full. Her grandmother opens the door, steps aside, and says only, "Good hands make for good work." That night, when the fire burns low and the family eats supper, the girl glances at the water bucket in the corner. The house feels more complete with it, knowing that she brought it and collected it. She now knows that water is not only carried, it's cared for. In her mind, the path to the well no longer feels cold or long. It just feels like an extension of the home. The next day, the smell of rising dough fills the house long before anyone speaks. The girl wakes to it and knows her next lesson will be at the hearth. Bread is not just food here. It's proof that a home is alive and tended to. Every house in the village has its own way of baking it, but the basic steps are nearly the same. Grind the grain, mix the dough, wait, and tend the fire. Her mother stands by the table with her sleeves rolled up, elbows already dusted white with flour. A wooden bowl sits beside her, the dough smooth and heavy. She presses her palms into it slowly, folding, turning, pressing again. Each motion has a rhythm, and it's steady and strong. The girl watches, and with her hands in the empty air, tries to copy it. The dough sticks to her fingers when she gets to the table, and she laughs a little, but her mother only tells her to keep going. The table is scarred from years of kneading. Its surface is clean, but very rough. The grandmother sits nearby, watching from her stool, spinning wool while she talks about how bread keeps the family safe. She reminds that it must never be cut while it's still hot, never placed upside down, and never thrown away. To waste bread is to offend the spirits that guard the hearth. When the dough is ready, her mother covers it with a linen cloth and sets it near the stove to rise. The air grows warm and thick with the smell of yeast. The girl's job is to keep the fire steady, adding small pieces of birch wood so the heat stays even. Her grandmother shows her how to listen to the crackle of the logs. Too loud means too hot. Too quiet means it's dying. The girl squats near the oven's mouth, eyes bright in the orange light. Her face begins to warm and her fingertips are a little blackened from touching the soot-stained bricks. Outside, snow begins to fall. The sound of it against the roof is soft and constant. The girl's mother opens the oven door with an iron hook, slides in the loaf when she feels it's hot enough, and closes it quickly. The bread must bake slowly so that the crust turns deep brown, but the inside stays soft. While they wait, the grandmother tells an old story about the pekelnicha, a spirit said to live behind the oven wall. If a baker grows careless or angry, the spirit might force the bread to burn. The girl smiles, imagining a small creature hiding behind the bricks. The waiting time teaches patience, too. The mother sits and patches clothes, her needle flashing in the firelight. The grandmother hums a tune too old to remember its words. The girl sits between them, listening to the quiet sounds, and realizes that true patience is learning to use your time effectively, even when you're doing something already. The hiss of fire, the tick of cooling metal, and the wind pressing against the window are sounds she appreciates as a backdrop to this. In this small house, time feels slow. Every moment of stillness belongs to the work that came before it. When the bread is ready, the smell fills the whole room. It smells of earth and something sweet almost. The mother takes a long wooden paddle and lifts the loaf out, placing it on the table. Steam curls upwards and fogs the window glass next to the table. The crust crackles as it cools. The girl wants to reach out to touch it, but the moment her hand twitches, her grandmother shakes her head. The grandmother takes a small piece after a few minutes, breaks it, and throws it into the stove. The flames catch it quickly. Only then does she nod for them to begin. The girl takes her first bite. The bread is dense and warm, and she can feel the work that went into it. Her mother smiles slightly and says nothing, but the pride shines in her eyes. The girl learns that baking bread is more than following steps. It begins days before, with grinding grain at the mill, carrying the flour home in a heavy sack, and keeping it dry. On stormy nights, women leave small bits of dried dough near the hearth to keep bad weather from spoiling the next batch. On holidays, a cross is pressed into the dough before baking to invite good fortune and blessings. When visitors come, bread is always offered first. It's set on a clean cloth and served with salt, a sign of peace and welcome. The girl's mother explains that this is an old rule. A home that shares bread never runs empty, she says. The girl repeats the phrase to herself, enjoying how it sounds. As the day fades, they bake more loaves, each one slightly different in shape. The girl helps brush the tops with water so they shine when they come out. Her arms grow tired, but she does not complain. The house feels full, of smell, of warmth, and of quiet effort. Her grandmother says that even after the bread is gone, its scent will stay in the walls, reminding them the work they do to keep this house loved. When night comes and the bread is cooling on the windowsill, the sound of wind moves softly through the trees and fills her ears. The girl stands by the hearth one last time, brushing flour from her small apron. She understands now why her mother calls bread the soul of the house. It's warm and alive. She presses her palm lightly against the loaf, feeling its heat fade beneath her hand. The girl sits by the window the next day, where the daylight is strong. Her mother places a stool beside her and sets a bundle of flax on a wooden distaff. The grandmother sits nearby with a spindle. She says calmly, "Hands must learn to move and turn steady before they can work a wheel." The grandmother pulls a few long strands of flax and twists them between her fingers. The girl nods and watches. She watches her grandmother roll the spindle along her thigh, and a thin thread forms from it. The spindle spins until it slows, and then she rolls again. Next, the grandmother brings wool. It still smells faintly of sheep. She shows how to comb it with flat brushes called cards, and how to keep it clean and soft. Wool must stay a little oily to hold it together, her grandmother says, while flax needs a little water. The grandmother dips her fingers in the bowl and smooths the fibers before twisting. The girl practices both until her hands move easily. She then has to practice all the other steps, after soaking and drying, breaking it apart and combing it fine. When the days turn cold, neighbors gather for spinning evenings. They arrive with baskets of wool and flax, talking softly while taking off their coats and scarves. The stove glows in the corner, and the room fills with the quiet sound of spinning. Spindles roll and drop, or wheels hum, and the smell of warm wood and tea mixes with occasional laughter. Her grandmother, while working on her own spindle, warns the girl about the kikimora, a household spirit said to tangle threads or break tools if women leave their work messy or spin too late at night. To keep the spirit away, they cover the distaff or place a small knife nearby before sleeping. The girl listens carefully and follows the rule. After all, no one wishes for bad luck. When her hands grow steadier, her mother brings out the spinning wheel. It has a large wooden circle and a treadle for her foot, with a whirring spindle. The girl presses the treadle gently and the wheel turns. She pulls the flax, letting the twist climb through it. Her mother instructs her how to do this. Pinch, pull, and breathe. They talk while working. One woman explains how onion skins can actually dye the wool yellow. Another mentions that birch leaves can do green. There's madder for red, and berries for purple if you find the right kind. The girl listens closely and looks at their hands and the small jars of dried plants they carry. Her grandmother says that a spinner's skill is worth more than gold, because every family needs strong thread for weaving and sewing. Spinning brings small rules that guide the household. Never work on feast days. Never leave a spindle unwatched or threads hanging loose. If a thread breaks 3 times, stop and tie it neatly before starting again. As the evening comes to a close and fades away, so too does the light outside. The orange glow of the stove gets brighter. The girl keeps her foot moving slowly and her hands steady. The spindle fills with neat layers of thread, and the women begin to pile out of the house. Soon, when it's just her mother, and her grandmother, she gets her work checked, and her grandmother nods. "Good hands," she says simply. When the flax is gone, her mother shows her how to wind the thread into a loose coil. 2 strands are then twisted together to make stronger yarn for weaving. The girl watches how even a single thin thread can become something lasting when joined with another. All the women tidied their tools before leaving, and the girl is reminded to do the same. The mother looses the drive band on the wheel as she does this, and covers the distaff with a cloth. And she sets the spindles upright in a jar. When the candle goes out, only the stove glows red. They're lying in bed now, and the room is quiet except for the faint creak of cooling wood, and the soft sound of the wheel slowing to stillness. The girl rubs her fingers together and feels the fine roughness of flax still on them. She looks at the basket of thread beside the stove, and she's proud of what her steady work had built. The ground is soft from spring rain, and the air smells of wet soil. The girl follows her mother into the yard carrying a small wooden bucket. It's planting season, and the garden behind the house will soon feed them through summer and fall. Her grandmother waits there already, sitting on a small stool with a bundle of seeds in her apron. The garden is divided into neat rows held by low fences made of woven branches. Her mother kneels first. She touches the earth, checking that it's warmed enough for planting. The girl copies her, pressing her palm flat against the soil. It feels cool and damp, but not cold. Her mother nods in approval, and the girl begins to help by digging small holes using a short wooden hoe. They work slowly, careful not to waste any seeds. The grandmother sorts seeds into small piles. Onions, carrots, cabbage, dill. Each has its own way of growing. The girl learns which ones need more sun, which ones need shade, and which ones grow best near others. Dill grow best near cucumbers, and onions near carrots. Her grandmother says these pairings help to keep pests away, and the girl of course believes her. In gardens, people rely on small bits of wisdom that have been working and passed through generations. As they plant, her mother explains that gardens must be quiet places. Loud voices can bring wind, and careful steps keep from harming the roots. So the girl learns to move softly and speak little. When they finish each row, the grandmother sprinkles a pinch of ashes from the stove over the soil. She says it feeds the earth and keeps away bad worms. In one corner of the garden, tall herbs grow: sage, chamomile, yarrow, and mint. The girl asks what they're for, since no one eats them. Her grandmother smiles and says these are for healing. She teaches her how each plant has a purpose: chamomile for calming, yarrow for wounds, sage for sore throats, and mint for stomach pains. When someone in the village falls ill, The older women gather these herbs carefully and hang them in bunches by the stove to dry, so they can be ground into powder and made into a tea. Some herbs are also used for spiritual protection. St. John's wort is hung above doors on Midsummer Night to keep away evil spirits. Wormwood is burned in small bundles to clean the air and drive out sickness. The grandmother explains that herbs are part of both medicine and belief. They also gather plants from the forest edge. The grandmother shows her small knife and a linen bag. She walks with them to the edge and cuts gently, never taking more than a handful of leaves from one spot. The forest gives what it can, she says. If you take too much, it won't grow back. In summer they collect berries, blue, red, and black, used for syrup or drying. In fall they pick mushrooms, but only the ones the grandmother trusts. She shows the girl the small details, how safe mushrooms have clean white stems and smooth caps, and how dangerous ones might smell sweet. When you don't know for sure, just leave it be, she warns. The girl never forgets that rule. At home, they dry the herbs by tying them in small bunches and hang them above the stove. The air fills with their smell as they're drying. The mint is sharp and cold, but the chamomile is soft and warm. This blends into a beautiful scent that makes the girl feel that much calmer. The grandmother labels each bundle with a scrap of cloth so no one mixes them up. Some herbs are crushed into powder, some are kept whole for a steeping in tea, and others are stored in jars with honey. The mother shows her how to make a simple salve. She melts lard in a pot, adds chopped herbs, and stirs slowly until the mixture smells strong. When it cools, it becomes a soft ointment for cuts or burns. A woman must know how to heal small things, she says to her daughter. The garden changes through the year. In spring, it's quiet and brown with soil unbroken. By midsummer, it hums with bees and the leaves shine dark green. The girl weeds the rows carefully, keeping the soil loose around each stem. Her mother waters in the evening when the sun is low so the ground stays moist. They speak little as they work, only short words about which plants need more care that day. When autumn comes, they harvest what they planted. The girl pulls up carrots, cabbages, and helps mother fill the baskets. The ground is cooler now, and her hands turn red from digging. They store everything in the cellar under the floor. Potatoes in piles, onions hung in braids, herbs wrapped in cloth. Her grandmother always leaves a small basket of the best vegetables on the windowsill overnight, as thanks to the household spirit. After the harvest, the garden rests. The soil is covered with straw to keep it from dying, and the tools are cleaned and stacked by the shed for winter. The girl looks at the empty rows, remembering the green plants that filled them just weeks before. Her grandmother pats her shoulder. It will wake again when the snow melts. The girl helps gather the last herbs drying by the stove. She rubs the spilled leaves between her fingers. The air smells of mint, smoke, and earth, once the grandmother ties the final bundle and hangs it above the hearth. The next morning is bright and cool. Sunlight spills across the yard, catching on the laundry lines that stretch between the apple trees. The girl and her mother carry wooden tubs outside, their arms full of soap, buckets, and bundles of clothes. Washing day comes once a week, and it takes most of the morning. Her grandmother waits nearby with a stool and a washboard, ready to help. The girl fills one tub with cold water from the well. Her mother pours in hot water carried from the stove, and steam rises, soft and white. The smell of lye soap fills the air. The girl dips her hands into the warm water and feels the soap sting. Her mother teaches her to scrub by pressing cloth against the board, rubbing until the dirt lifts. The clothes are rinsed in the second tub and then wrung out by hand. Water splashes over their skirts and soaks their sleeves, but no one minds. The girl hangs each piece neatly on the line with wooden pegs. The wind catches the shirts and shifts them gently, making them look like small flags. Across them, the yard smells of sweet, wet linen and smoke from the chimney. While they work, the grandmother explains that a clean home is not only for appearance. In the old stories, unwashed rooms draw misfortune. The house spirit is called the domovoi, and it likes tidy corners, warm stoves, and swept floors. If a family neglects their home with dirty clothes and unswept floors, the spirit grows restless and plays tricks. spilled milk suddenly on the table, keys going missing, and creaking doors at night. After the laundry is done and hung, they move inside. The girl takes the broom and starts sweeping from the corners to the door, just as her mother taught her. She shakes the rugs outside, beats the dust free, then brings them back in once they smell of the cold air. Her grandmother wipes the table with a wet cloth and folds away the dishes. The mother scrubs the stove with a brush until the bricks are bright red again. The room slowly changes from cluttered to orderly. They stop only to eat a small meal, bread and some pickles with tea, and then they begin again. The girl cleans the small window with a piece of linen and a mix of water and vinegar. The glass shines faintly. Her mother inspects and smiles. A clean window brings sunlight, and that can bring warmth not just to the body, but to the mind. At midday, they heat more water in the large pot for bathing. The girl carries it to the corner where a wooden tub stands behind a screen. Baths are taken once or twice a week, depending on the weather and how much water they can spare. The mother tests the heat, then pours in cold water until it feels right. The girl adds a handful of mint leaves and birch twigs for scent. The grandmother reminds her that washing the body is just as important as washing clothes. A clean face brings luck and good attention. People believe that dirt attracts illness, but they also believe that a tidy person shows respect for others. The girl learns how to wash quickly, starting from the face and hands and ending with her feet. When they finish, the dirty water is carried outside and poured near the garden. The mother says that throwing wastewater near the threshold of the door can wash away good fortune. The rest of the day is spent airing bedding and sweeping the yard. The grandmother checks the shelves for dust and folds towels into neat stacks. The mother scrubs the floorboards with sand and hot water until they shine pale. The sound of brushes and buckets echoes softly through the house. By late afternoon, everything smells clean. In the evening, they change into fresh linen shirts and sit by the hearth. The girl runs her fingers through her hair, which smells faintly of smoke and mint from the bath. Her grandmother braids it loosely, her fingers slow and gentle. A woman's hair must be kept neat or it might make her mind messy, her grandmother says. As the day ends, the room glows softly in the firelight. The laundry on the line moves in the wind outside, dry now and stiff from the air. The floors are smooth, the dishes are stacked, and the corners are swept clean. The girl's hands are red and rough from soap, but she feels proud. Her grandmother pours the last of the warm water into a small basin and washes her own hands slowly. The girl helps pour it out near the stove when her grandmother is finished. The days now grow longer, and the village begins to prepare for the summer festivals. The girl stands in the yard, helping her mother wash bright ribbons and white linen shirts. Her grandmother sits nearby, weaving flower wreaths that will dry in the sun. These are busy weeks. Every household sweeps its yard, fixes broken fences, and hangs clean towels near the icons inside the home. The air smells of baking bread and wood smoke, and laughter carries through the open windows. The girl learns that festivals are not only about joy. They're also times when girls show what they've learned. Her grandmother says how you stand, how you speak, and how you work. All these will show your worth. For the celebration of Kupala night, the women gather early to prepare. The mother and daughter walk to the meadow to pick flowers and herbs before sunrise, when the dew is believed to have healing power. They fill baskets with wildflowers, a collection of clover and daisies and ferns, and bring them home to weave into wreaths. The grandmother tells her that these wreaths protect the home and can potentially reveal the future. At night, girls float their wreaths on the river to see where they drift. If a wreath floats smoothly, the girl will marry soon. If it sinks, she must wait another year. During the festival, bonfires burn near the riverbank. People sing and dance and even jump over the flames for good luck. The girl watches the older women, keeping a careful eye on the younger ones. They remind them not to wander too far and to be polite to those who speak to them. Her grandmother sits on a log, smiling, her hands folded in her lap. When the festival ends, the quiet returns. The girl helps her mother store the leftover food and hang the herbs to dry. The wreaths are placed above the door, and ashes from the bonfire are sprinkled in the garden for protection. Later that summer, talk in the village turns towards marriages. Some girls close to the girl's age are already betrothed. The grandmother explains that preparing for marriage takes time, not just celebration. A young woman must know all her household tasks: baking, spinning, sewing, cleaning. Each skill is proof of readiness. The girl listens quietly as her mother folds a linen towel into a chest. The girl learns about the hope chest, a wooden box where unmarried girls store cloth, shirts, ribbons, and small embroidered linens they've made for themselves. Her mother says, "Every piece you make will speak for you." It shows the family's care and the girl's effort to learn. Some have red stitching on the edges, crosses, stars, or lines that symbolize blessings, but each item is clean and mended. The grandmother helps her embroider the first one, guiding her hand slowly with the needle. At weddings, the older women lead the ceremonies. They braid the bride's hair, place a white kerchief over her head, and tie a red ribbon at her waist. The girl is staring dreamily into the box, and her grandmother notices and reminds her as she teaches the embroidery, think of each stitch as holding your future home together. These steps are meant to protect her and remind her of her duties. The girl watches the rituals of other girls with wide eyes. The grandmother explains that the red ribbons keep away envy and sickness, and the white kerchief shows purity and respect. In winter, when the work slows, the grandmother gathers the girls to teach song and stories for the special day. They practice how to greet guests, how to pour tea, and how to move quietly. The girl learns to walk with her hands folded in front of her and to keep her head slightly bowed when speaking to elders. Festivals return each season: harvest festivals, winter feasts, and spring blessings. The girl helps her family prepare for each one. She polishes dishes, helps cook dumplings, and keeps the fire going through long nights of celebration. As she grows, her tasks grow too. The women trust her to handle more work and with fewer mistakes. Her grandmother reminds her often that the joy of festivals comes from the effort before them. You cannot welcome a guest in a house unready, and preparing the house brings the pride to your heart. When the music fades and people go home, the girl takes these words to heart and stays behind to help gather dishes, shake out the tablecloths, and put away what was used. As autumn approaches, the grandmother gives her a small wooden comb carved with flowers. "Keep this when you marry," she says. "It means you can begin each day with calm and neatness." The girl holds it carefully, not yet ready for such a change, but understanding it. That night, she sits near the stove as her mother folds more clean linens into the chest. The air now smells of smoke and apples and drying herbs. Her grandmother hums an old wedding song softly. The girl listens and keeps working. The nights grow longer again, and the wind carries the bracing chill of frost now. Inside the wooden house, the fire burns low but steady. The girl sits near the stove with her mother and grandmother. The days of work are finished. She's learned how to clean tools, sweep floors, fill the water bucket, bake bread, prepare clothes, and prepare herself for eventual weddings. Outside, snow begins to fall quietly over the yard. The sound is soft, almost like breathing. The winter season is not only a time for the housework to rest and go indoors, but a time for her to reflect on her lessons and absorb them. Evenings are ripe for rest, but also still ripe for teaching. The grandmother sits wrapped in a shawl, her hands busy with knitting. The girl and her mother sit close, mending shirts and sewing patches into old aprons. The grandmother begins to speak in her calm, low voice. She talks about how women used to gather during long winters not just to spin, but to bake and tell stories together. She says the house felt even more alive when women shared the warmth. The girl listens, her needle moving slowly through her own cloth. Grandmother reminds her that every part of a home has meaning. The stove keeps them fed, the broom keeps them safe, and the table gathers their hearts. The girl asks her grandmother how she learned all these things and what keeps them so strong in her mind. The old woman smiles and says, "The same way you have learned it, by watching my women when I was a girl." She explains that a woman's true wisdom is always passed down hand to hand, ear to ear, not through books or writing. The girl looks at her mother, who folds a linen towel with slow, neat hands. Later in the evening, the grandmother takes a small jar from the shelf. Inside are dried herbs mixed with salt. She sprinkles a pinch into the fire, and the flames hiss softly. The smell is sharp and earthy. Some nights are quiet with only the sound of the fire and the creak of wood. Other nights, the grandmother tells stories about other household spirits. The girl listens closely and sometimes glances towards the dark corner near the stove, half expecting to see something move. The mother often joins in with stories of her own. She tells how, as a child, she burned bread once and cried, thinking the domovoi would be angry. Her own mother comforted her and says, "The domovoi does not punish failure, only laziness." On quiet nights, the girl helps polish the family treasures and smiles, knowing that she's doing the right thing by moving and being a part of her home. The treasures are metal spoons, a copper cup, and an old mirror with a wooden frame. Her grandmother says it's good luck to see a clean reflection before bed. When the clock's shadow reaches the far wall, the grandmother says it's time to rest. They sit for a moment as the girl adds one last log to the fire, watching it catch. Before sleep, when the fire has burned out, they cover the embers with ash so the coals will survive the night. The mother crosses herself and whispers a short prayer. The grandmother does the same, and the girl follows her lead. Then they begin checking the door, straightening the tablecloth, and folding the last towel. Outside, as the snow keeps falling, the room darkens, and there's only the faint glow of the stove. In the dark, the grandmother's voice breaks the silence one last time. "One day you will have your own hearth. Remember that warmth continues where hands continue to work." The girl nods, though her eyes are heavy. The lesson is not new, but it's a blessing, and she's grateful for it. The girl lies down beside her mother, wrapped in wool blankets, and the house is still except for the sound of wind against the walls. Through the rhythm of these days, young Slavic women learned how to build homes that could endure both work and wintertime. Their lessons were not written or spoken in grand ways, they were just shown through steady hands and patience. Such customs might look like chores or habits for people outside these villages, but within those walls of pine wood and clay, there was a deeper element, a quiet promise that love and order can grow from daily care.